G'day, it's Professor Joseph Drew, and I'm here to talk to you about whether administration is necessarily the answer. Now, there's a couple of reasons why local governments might be placed into administration. The council might be at deadlock and they might be fighting amongst themselves and no longer able to function as a council. That's clearly a different situation to what I'm talking about. In those deadlock scenarios, it might be necessarily to have a circuit breaker such as administration. The thing I'm thinking about most here, though, are councils which are placed into financial administration. Those councils have run out of money essentially, and a local government minister has sacked or dismissed those councillors and appointed their own person to have the full powers that the council used to enjoy. And I wonder whether that's the best method of dealing with the problem. I wonder how much learning gets done. I wonder how much control and transparency and accountability there is in that model. And towards the end of this video, I'll propose a much better model. So a good case study is the sad story of Central Darling Shire. Their administration commenced in December 2013 when they essentially ran out of money. At the time, in 2013, they had a deficit, according to the audited financial statements, of $968,000, including the capital grants. They had total borrowings of $1.252 million. Now, there's a couple interesting things here. First of all, the administration started off as a temporary measure, and then it was made permanent, and then it was extended for another 4 years, and then it was extended for another 4 years again. And that's one of my big problems with administration. They just keep going on and on and on, and the community never gets out of it. So at present, they're told that they will come out of administration in 2024, 11 years later, but I'm not thoroughly convinced that that will happen at all anyway. Second of all, at the time that they were placed in administration, when they ran out of money, a lot of the councillors at the time, and I've read the transcripts as well as the report, were saying, look, the problem is that we've been shortchanged on these financial assistance grants. This is money that comes from the federal government via State Local Government Grants Commission that's supposed to be allocated according to the legislation. And there's a lot of scholarly evidence, and there's a lot of people in the sector that know that that's not the case at all. Now, I tended to agree with the councillors at the time. They were being shortchanged in a big way with their financial assistance grants. Now, interestingly, the minister at the time appointed the head of the New South Wales Local Government Grants Commission to run the public inquiry into the financial failure of Central Darling Shire. Now, there's a clear misapprehension of bias there. It's hard to suggest and believe that this person wouldn't have had any bias. And indeed, what we've found is that within a few years, Central Darling Shire's grants have gone up by $2.44 million per year. Now, if you have a look at the deficit they were originally in, the total borrowings they were originally in, it's really hard to understand how they can still be in administration. And this is part of the puzzle, which I'll get onto the next slide. But one thing that people forget, administrators still have the same levers as everyone else. They can put up fees and charges, they can put up taxes, rates we call them in New South Wales, they can reduce expenditure, and they can get help through increased grants, and these are what we refer to as backdoor bailouts. And these are their levers. But you can see how much the grants have gone up over many, many years now, and it makes one wonder why they're still in financial administration. So where are the incentives? This is the problem. Economics is a social science that believes that people respond to incentives. Where is the incentive for the administrator to make this local government financially sustainable and financially viable again? The day he does that is the day he loses his job. It's a fly-in, fly-out job with full powers of a council, very little transparency, and on a very, very generous salary. Where is the incentive to get this council fixed? And from the state government's perspective too, where is the incentive for the existing minister to take the risk and say, okay, we'll give you, put your councillors back on, restore your democracy, and give you a shot at running this now. We've got you back okay. Where is the incentive? There's a lot of risk. Things go wrong again, she's got to hold a public inquiry, appoint administrators again, and those things aren't politically popular. So there's a lack of incentives in the existing administrator model, and that's what bothers me. And I think that's what explains why Central Darling Shire is looking at least 11 years and counting of administration, which is a long time not to have democracy in a country that prides itself on its democracy, and a country that criticises other regimes for not having democratic institutions. So as I've suggested already, there's reduced transparency. You don't have a room with a whole heap of councillors arguing the toss about different ideas and programs. You've got a one-man band, and it will be man because it's an old boys club that do all these administrations. They have complete power of all the councillors combined. So there's very little transparency, and there's no electoral accountability at all. Presumably these administrators are accountable to the minister, but given that this has gone on, well, it's scheduled to go on for 11 years and nothing's actually been fixed, it makes one wonder whether the administrator is necessarily being held to account by the minister. There's a concentration of power, and any time you have a concentration of power, you have a risk that unwarranted perquisites and the like will be taken advantage of. It's a dangerous situation. As a natural law philosopher, I'm very much against the concentration of power and the concentration of competence. They're key ideas from natural law philosophy. There's no learning for the political class. The councillors are totally shut out of the whole process. How are they going to learn what they need to do to make this council financially sustainable and financially viable? What happens when we eventually, presumably, one day will go back to democracy? Where are the experienced councillors going to come from? 11 years later, most of them will have passed away or no longer be interested in local government. We've lost the experience, and how is a completely inexperienced council going to be able to make good decisions? So that's a problem. There's no democracy, as I say. We pride ourselves on being a democratic nation. And there's often a failure of natural justice. Councillors are hung, drawn and quartered when their councillors get put into administration. And some of the criticisms are reasonable. Some councils do wrong things. In fact, a lot of councils do wrong things. But some of the criticisms are difficult to substantiate, given that, particularly in New South Wales, they're not supposed to be involved in operational matters. If they're taking the advice of the Chief Financial Officer and the General Manager, and they're acting prudently on that advice, but that advice is wrong, how do you morally hold those councillors responsible for it? It's a real problem. And there is potential for political mischief. I'm not suggesting it's happened this time, or that it will necessarily happen in the future, but you often have a minister from one political party and you'll have councillors from another political party. The opportunity is there for political mischief, for council laws to be dismissed, not necessarily because they can't get their act together and they can't do better, but because it's politically expedient to do so. So there is a much better model. It's essentially the model I used in Cootamundra to great success. And I worked with a great group of councillors there, and it's simply to be a mentor, to get someone who's a bona fide expert, that has real expertise, to counsel these councillors, teach them what they need to know to run a financially sustainable council, give them their options, give them good reasons for selecting good options. And you know what? People will make good decisions. They did every single time in Cootamundra, and they learnt through the process. And the community still had control. And it wasn't a one-man autocracy running the show. It was still their group of democratically elected councillors. And it's a much better model. It was extremely successful. You know, we avoided a near certainty of insolvency at Cootamundra through this model. It works. And other models haven't. 11 years, Central Darling Shire has been languishing with no democratically elected councillors. I think that's a pretty good indictment of the model. It doesn't work. And this expert, if they're truly expert, if they're a really good communicator, the councillors are going to listen to them, they're going to make good decisions. But this expert should have easy access to the minister. If the councillors decide to ignore the good advice and do the wrong thing, they need to be able to have access to the minister and get the minister to step in on particular decisions if the council's really going the wrong way. But I'm 100% convinced if you had good, proper experts not these commercial consultants that keep making disasters in local government, real experts that know what they're doing their job well, with the right skills, we would rarely, if ever, have to go to the minister to get them to step in. It's a much better model. Now, we've got another community about to go into administration, Central Coast, and I feel very sad for that community. It was a forced amalgamation in 2016. They've essentially run out of money. And I'd just like to put it to the minister, could we consider a better model? Could we consider this model? I'd really hate to see another community deprived of democracy for 11 years. I'd really hate to see another group of councillors deprived of opportunity to learn, and us sometime in the future trying to run a council with no experience. So I really do think this is a better model. This model is covered in some detail in my new book, Saving Local Government. It'll come out around August, September this year. And I really encourage people to read that book to get the full details about what I'm talking about here. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.